Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The Turkish-American relationship has been strained over many years now, but has recently shown a marked improvement, mainly due to two important events. First, the rise of the Turkish-supported regime in Damascus, and second, the bonding between President Trump and Erdogan. The latest manifestation of the power of personal politics on the global stage is Erdogan's willingness to put pressure on Hamas to agree to Trump's plan for Gaza and beyond. So what role are the Turks going to play in this emerging Middle East? Joining us to analyze this matter include Ambassador Danya Ayalon, formerly Israel's ambassador to the United States, as well as Deputy Foreign Minister. It's good to have you, sir.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Brigadier General in Reserve, Yossi Kuperwasser, formerly a Director General at the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, as well as the head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate, Research and Assessment Division, and currently the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Pleasure having you. And last but not least, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. And Amir, while we're looking at the prism of Turkey's exploitation of the woes that the Iranians have befallen during the course of the past 2 years vis-a-vis Israel, we do need to recognize that from America's perspective, they're looking at Turkey as a country that is increasingly seeking strategic autonomy with an increasing vocality, not only rhetoric-wise, but also action-wise, in seeking alternatives to include particularly the Chinese, but also relationships with others that would grant it the capacity to operate with beyond the scope of America's various alliances. And that is something that has drawn the American establishment to foster a new relationship with the Turks that has now far-reaching ramifications to everyone in the Middle East, to include Israel.
It may surprise some in our audience to know that the American penetration of the Middle East, including the Mediterranean, but not limited to the Mediterranean, later the Levant, the Persian or Arabian Gulf, started with the Turkish angle. Right after World War II, the Turkish ambassador to Washington, Ertegun, whose sons later founded Atlantic Records, famous record label, died, and the Truman administration used the occasion to send his coffin aboard the USS Missouri right after the Japanese surrender to Turkey. And they stayed. This is how the Sixth Fleet started. And
what year was that?
1946. And this is while the British dominated the western side of the Mediterranean. So Turkey has always been very important in the American scheme of things as it applies to the Middle East. Why? Because Turkey has Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, as its main rival. Of course, it controls the Black Sea, the Straits, and Turkey was also the biggest land army to contribute to the Korean War effort of the United States and as a member of NATO. Now, we are still talking about a regional power, Turkey, with regional ambitions, not global ambitions, vis-a-vis the biggest, the major world power. We do have now the unique situation in which President Trump considers President Erdogan a personal friend of his, despite the differences between the national policies, and managed to get him to his side vis-a-vis the Gaza plan, and earlier this week in the Egyptian summit regarding the Middle East from now on. So even though there are some contradictions, even though the United States has other allies and partners, nevertheless, Turkey is an important piece in the puzzle.
It may have been the actor that brought the Americans into the theater, not for the first time. It's also the same actor that was responsible for the first Mediterranean war that the United States waged against the shores of Tripoli, as we know, of course.
Barbary.
The Barbary states, vassal states of the Ottoman Empire that have managed to seize 1.5, roughly, according to various estimates, million slaves from both Europe and the United States, to include some very famous
This is still the Marine Corps anthem.
Exactly.
European admirals were also captured over the years there. And it's quite fascinating to see how Turkey played also that role in this context. But nonetheless, when we're looking at the current complexity, General Kuperwasser, Turkey has always had aspirations. It now is characterized as a country with Neotomanic aspirations. How do you see this translated in today's strategic climate?
Well, I think that they still have those aspirations, and they think that they have an opportunity to gain some traction in this direction. It's the fact that the United States needed them in order to broker the deal in Gaza, and that their decision to weigh in was so detrimental in reaching this deal, gives them leverage that they can use in order to get something in return. And they have one problem, that in order to get what they want, they need to keep working on this deal. It's not enough that they did what they did, but they have to keep working, because if something goes wrong with the deal, especially with Hamas, then all eyes are going to be on them and on Qatar. So they have to make sure that Hamas delivers and behaves itself. There's going to be a big effort to find a way that either Hamas is going to disarm, or that there's going to be a way, as the Qataris speak about it, that would guarantee that Hamas is not going to be a belligerent force in Gaza, and that Israel can rest assured that Gaza is not going to be a place from which it is going to be attacked again. But if the Turks are going to be able to deliver that, and they have a leverage over Hamas now, if this is going to be the case, I think that the Turks would expect the United States, and they have some reasons to believe this is going to be the case, to support their aspirations for hegemony in the region. And the first goal is going to be the support of the United States in establishing a protectorate of the Turks in Syria. That's going to be the first goal of the Turks, close to Turkey, very important also from the perspective of the Kurds and many other aspects. And this will make Turkey very close to Israel. That's something that we have to worry about. But then the second thing that's going to be on the agenda, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to convince the Americans to go that way, is going to be the F-35. If they're going to be able to convince the United States to allow them to receive the F-35, this would mean not only that they have a huge army that's very capable anyhow, but it's going to be equipped with the state-of-the-art weaponry. And that would mean that our assumption of the QME, qualitative military age of Israel, that was always dealing with Arab countries, if Turkey has a presence in Syria and has all these capabilities, then we have to figure out what does that mean to the QME. These are all kinds of developments that might be worrying in the future. At the same time, there's also some opportunities here, because if this all is under American auspices, then there's reason to believe that we can translate that into better relations with Turkey, especially that the war in Gaza is over. At least less confrontational attitude by the Turks. I think one of the things we have to insist on, that President Trump will do something about it. I mean, it's wonderful to be friends with Erdogan, but make sure that he speaks a little bit differently than the way he speaks until now. That's something that has to be dealt with.
Not only speaks, but acts. Ambassador Ayalon, with that being said, the complexities are fluid. The situation in Syria vis-a-vis Turkey is a situation in which some may claim that the civil war is over, but reality on the ground dictates otherwise. And in broader terms, Turkey has aspirations for the African continent, for the Southern Caucasus, when we're talking about Azerbaijan, Armenia, the broader scheme of strategic alignment of Turkic states, which Ankara has pushed forward under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan now for many years. How do we reconcile with all those various shifts at a time that we see that the diminishing power of Iran is indeed enabling Turkey's bolstering on pretty much every level?
Yes, Jonathan. I think from a historic perspective, it seems like Turkey is in the best geopolitical situation since the Ottoman Empire, which extended all over the Middle East and almost all over Europe. I mean, if they were not stopped in Vienna back in 1638, they would have had Europe as well. And now they are in a very strong situation, first of all, because of the rivals are down. So just by a proportion, they are up, but also because of the friendship, as you mentioned, between Turkey and the United States, Erdogan personally with Trump. Now, I think Trump or the United States has a very, I would say, nuanced but sophisticated policy here. I don't know whether if it's by design or by default, but what Trump is doing with Erdogan is the old cliche that keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And by bringing actually Turkey into the tent, for instance, in Gaza, I think there's a lot of concern, certainly for Israel, with Turkey being there. We have to remember that Erdogan and the AKP are bent on the ideology of Hamas. Basically, the AKP is a Turkish Muslim Brotherhood, as opposed to Arab Muslim Brotherhood, but it's the same. And
They hold the same ideology.
yes, and Turkey has been very disruptive and a destabilizing force throughout the time of Erdogan. If we just mention a few things, they actually spewed the incitement against Israel over the Temple Mount, directly with money and also through NGOs, the Marmara, of course, IHH, and let alone all the help that they have been given to Hamas, political, economic, and even more. Until now, we have most of Hamas treasures are in Turkey, in real companies, even companies that are traded in the Turkish exchange, stock exchange. So this is something of a concern, but by bringing them into the tent, I think you are creating a stake for Turkey because they have a lot to gain. They have a lot to gain, first of all, politically, status-wise, vis-a-vis, of course, Syria, but also in Gaza. Many Turkish companies are vying for the reconstruction of Gaza. So this is maybe something which will tame Erdogan because he has really a stake in the success of this the whole exercise and especially the reconstruction.
Well,
So-
Turkish reconstruction was essentially vital for the flourishing city of Tel Aviv in many points of the last couple of decades. But Mr. Owen, when we're talking about the Turkish aspirations, and we hear what President Erdogan has been saying over the course of the past 8 to 9 years, also before that, but nonetheless, the most vocal highlight was in 2017 when the reform of the Turkish constitutions occurred. And you could hear President Erdogan immediately thereafter going to the mausoleum of Selim I, the Ottoman Sultan who ultimately conquered Damascus and then Jerusalem, saying, "We are the descendants of this Ottoman Sultan. We are, namely the AKP faction, the grandchildren and the ones who will ultimately carry the baton, so to speak, of Selim I. And less than 2-3 weeks later, he comes out and states that Jerusalem is an Ottoman city and that he has aspirations to see this city preserved. Now, alongside what Ambassador Ayalon just mentioned, we also need to take into account that there is a complexity there since they are investing heavily in East Jerusalem and they are very keen on seeing Turkish influence flourish in the city. How does Israel reconcile with that?
Not only Israel. Here we are sitting in our studio, a kilometer or so, a couple of kilometers, a mile from the wall surrounding the old city of Jerusalem and Sultan Suleiman Street and all the other markings of the
Built
former.
1536?
Yes, 400 years, exactly, 1517 to 1917. But the Turks are going to find themselves at odds not only with Israel, because if you want to mention history, David Ben-Gurion, after 1956, the Sinai-Suez campaign revived the old kingdom of David, saying that this is the third kingdom. He later had
By
to...
the way, he studied in Turkey.
Yes, of course.
Academic studies.
All of the founding fathers of Israel, Moshe Sharet, Yitzhak Ben Tzvi, and others, because he wanted to become a minister in the Turkish government. Of course, no one knew that the Ottoman Empire will collapse. But the Arab parts and the Muslim parts of Jerusalem are in competition between various Arab countries, mostly monarchies. You remember the three kings of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Morocco, who want to supervise Al-Aqsa, and the Palestinians. The Palestinians are not going to let any other Arab force, let alone the Turks, take over. So yes, of course, Israel is not going to let Erdogan get any part of his ambition in the capital of Israel.
Ironically, the Palestinian flag as we know it today is the flag that the Arabs in the region actually hoisted to announce resistance against the Ottomans rather than anything else. But, seeing that the various squares in Turkey packed with Palestinian flags is something that I'm sure the previous sultans and leaders of Turkey would not be
but they
ecstatic about.
They would consider it a province, a governorate, wilayat
Sure.
of the empire, not a co-equal entity.
Well, they defined it as Al-Sham, the lands of Damascus, but General Kuperwasser, taking one step backwards, the Turks, historically speaking, view the Iranians as their main rival in the region. Of course, they had the issue of the Egyptians, but they always saw the Egyptians or the Mamluks at the time as inferior to the Iranians who were more dominant. How do you see this new dynamic in which the Islamic Republic has been far weakened in light of its engagement against Israel ultimately bring about a more aggressive posture of Turkey that seeks to ensure that the Iranians remain weak, not necessarily entirely diminished, but at least weak enough to be able to expand Turkey's influence at its expense?
I think the Turks look at the developments with two rivals that they have in the region. One is Iran, and the other is Israel.
Well, yeah.
And they see the battle. They say that let them fight each other. We are going to gain from the weakening that both of them.
And
are going to
Greece.
suffer.
They have three rivals.
And Greece is not in the region. For them.
Yeah, Mediterranean.
It's a different region. And the idea of the Turks is to take advantage of that. And Iran is weakening as we speak because of the sanctions and because of the damage done to its nuclear project in June. And because of everything that's happening, the proxies are disappearing and Assad fell into the hands of Turkey. And everything is going their way. They are also investing in Lebanon at the expense of the Iranians. They are gaining a lot from the weakening of Iran. And they are very happy also with the fact that Israel is so dependent on the Americans now because of the international cry against Israel and the genocide and starvation lies and so on and so forth.
Which their own state channels have contributed significantly to.
Significantly. They understand that they are not going to face Israel militarily, but they can face Israel on the public relations front very strongly. And when we speak about the Red-Green alliance in the West, the green is supported by the Turks very profoundly. We have to remember that. So they are fighting to weaken both competitors in the Middle East in something that because those two competitors fight each other, and because of what the Turks are doing themselves, they gain a lot. We have to remember also in this context the situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which is also playing into the hands of Turkey and the opening of the Zangezur crossing and so on and so forth. Everything is going the Turkish way. And I think that, as Danny said correctly, the one thing that is diminishing the possible consequences of that is that the Americans keep them very close and make sure that they don't run out of control. And we should see how we can take advantage of that and of our alliance with the Americans in order to make sure that we don't run into direct confrontation with the Turks. That is something that the Americans want to avoid as well. So we have a common interest here with the Americans. This is a very complicated situation, and we shouldn't be complacent about it. And we should remember that Turkey basically is an opponent of Israel. Say
rival.
It's not a rival and opponent, not an enemy, but
Right.
rival.
And within this context, because Israel understands that Turkey is there to stay, Turkey believes now, after seeing what happened in Iran, despite the fact that they were under the impression that Israel is going to lose the 12-day war, just to put things into context, I think post-war versus Iran, they understand that Israel is significantly more powerful than what they initially thought. Is this going to alter the equation from Ankara's perspective? And how does Jerusalem view that?
Well, I think that the Turks were quite at awe with the Israeli performance. Intelligence-wise, technology-wise, operation, there's no doubt now that the Israeli Air Force is the most dominant power in the region, maybe even beyond. So the Turks are going to, I think, be very careful not to move too close to Israel. As General Kuperwasser mentioned, the next theater could be in Syria, as the Turks are taking the place of Iran, trying to move their assets towards the Golan Heights. And our mission, of course, and interest is to keep them out. So that's going to be very interesting. And again, the United States will play a major role here. But Turkey, we must understand that they look at themselves as not just as a regional power, almost as a superpower. I mean, we remember through history, they were equal to Russia. The Turkish-Russian wars were almost between pars. You mentioned, Jonathan, how they have their hands in so many pots, not just in the Middle East and in Europe, of course, as part of NATO, in Africa, but also with the diminishing power of Russia. They are now in the Caucasians and all this Central Asia. They're also investing a lot over there. We have to remember that most of the stans, many of them speak Turkish. They have a Turkish culture. So when you look from the standpoint of Ankara, they have a lot of issues, a lot of fronts to worry about. Israel is only one. For us, Turkey now, after Iran will be down, hopefully, will be the most dominant front. So there is an inequality here, which is, I believe, to Israel's favor.
And Turkey, of course, is also competing with other Muslim nations on who builds the majority of mosques in Europe, since they believe that Europe will ultimately turn into a Muslim continent, something that they are competing with one another to show their dominance within the religious sphere. But we are drawing near to the end of the program, and I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to have a closing minute. Okay, we keep it at one, even less, 45 seconds. So without further ado,
I give my minute to Amir.
No,
take
you
it
have
back.
45. Go ahead, Mr. Owen.
It's like the bazaar in Istanbul. No, please, no. I'll give it to you for free.
Go ahead, Amir.
5 years ago, Turkey lost an asset, the veto power it had, still has, but not in this regard, in the consensus-based structure of NATO over Israel. As long as Israel was part, under the American regime, of EUCOM, the European Command, which was co-headed with NATO, Turkey could stop whatever activities. Once Israel was moved to the Central Command, CENTCOM, the Americans don't have to regard Turkey's opposition to Israeli
Very
participation.
important point. I will mention that EUCOM loves Turkey, CENTCOM not so much. And that is something that does play to the detriment of Ankara.
EUCOM is in
when it
charge
comes
of
to the Middle
Russia,
East.
so
Right.
this is-
Gerald.
Well, I think that the most important thing to keep in mind is that we got to find a way to take care of this animosity that the Turks have towards us, and the way to do that is through the United States. That's going to be our focus right now, because Turkey is going to play a role. So we have to admit the fact that Turkey is going to play a great role both in Gaza and in Syria, and regionally, whether we like it or not. And at least minimize the animosity that goes along with it.
Ambassador Aylan.
Well, Jonathan, since there's no lost love between Turkey and the major Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, even Jordan, I think the Israeli foreign policy would be very smart to form this alliance against Turkey. We have many, many interests that are
Not against Turkey, to rival
to rival Turkey, absolutely.
Right.
But it's not the Turks that, who are against Israel. It's Erdogan and his party. There was, of course, a close bond between the Israeli military and its Turkish counterparts, and it may still
There are some
be
people who
revived.
support Erdogan in Turkey, and you can see the rallies and the demonstrations in support of it. And their success in portraying us as genociders and starvation people is making it difficult for them to rule over the amount of hate to Israel that you find in the Turkish street.
To control that hate, of course, for ultimately political gain within the inner circles of Ankara's elites. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Ambassador Aylan, General Kuperwasser, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
For more of TV7 Israel's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.